Welcome to Spiritual Dessert Trews for Russell Brand, episode 35. This is a very funky hat. Still working on Biocentrism. Yes, I'm wearing clothes. Oh! I taught yoga. That's a long pause. I was thinking about why I just didn't take everything off. Oh, by the way, I won the science fair with my chicken project, and the principal had to congratulate my mother in front of the whole school. After he said his mother was not a good mother. Ha ha ha. Like Emerson and Thoreau, two of the greatest American transcendentalists, my youth was spent exploring the forests in Massachusetts, which teem with life. More importantly, I found that for each life there was a universe, its own universe. Witnessing my fellow creatures, I began to see that each appeared to generate a sphere of existence and realized that our perceptions may be unique, but perhaps not special. One of my earliest memories of boyhood was venturing beyond the moan boundary of our backyard into the wild, overgrown region bordering the woods. We had something similar to that. I called it my own little beach. It was the neighbor's beach. Today, the world's population, twice what it was then, but even now, many kids undoubtedly still know where the known world ends and the wild, slightly spooky and dangerous, untamed universe begins. We're all one, doesn't matter. One day, after crossing that boundary from the orderly to the feral, and after working my way through... Rip! It stopped. Anyway, working my way through the thickets, I came to an old, gnarled apple tree. The apple tree song. Smothered through the thickets, in the vines. I squeezed my way into the hidden clearing underneath it. It seemed wonderful. On the one hand, that I had discovered a place that no other human being ever knew existed. On the other hand, I was confused about how such a place could exist if I hadn't discovered it. I was raised a Catholic, so I thought I had found a special place on God's stage. And from some celestial vantage point, I was being scrutinized and watched by the Supreme Creator, perhaps almost as narrowly as I, as a medical student, with a microscope, would one day scrutinize the tiny creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. At that moment, long ago, other questions came to disturb my wonder, though they did not appreciate that those musings were at least as ancient as my species itself. If indeed God had made the world, then who made God? This question kept tormenting me long before I would see micrographs of DNA or the tracks of matter or antimatter created in a bumble chamber by the collision of high-energy particles. I felt on both an instinctive and intellectual level that it did not make sense for this place to exist if no one observed it. My home life, as I have already implied, was less than the Norman Rockwell ideal. My father was a professional gambler. Not my father. Definitely not my father. He's a workaholic. Who gave up everything for my family. He left his homeland, his country, and whew! He had some hard times. Talk about manifesting. And none of my three sisters finished high school. Whoa! Not my brother and I. We started our butts off. I don't have one left. The efforts that my older sister and I made to escape beatings, at home, steeled me to expect a life of confrontation. Because my parents didn't allow me to hang around the house, unless to eat or sleep, I was basically left on my own. For play, I took excursions deep into the surrounding forests. following streams and animal tracks. Swamp or creek bed, too muddy or too dangerous. I was sure no one had ever seen or been to those places. I imagined that so far as almost everyone was concerned, they didn't exist. But of course they did exist. They teemed with as much life as any large city, with snakes, muskrats, raccoons, turtles, and birds. My understanding of nature began on those journeys. I rolled logs looking for salamanders and climbed trees to investigate bird nests and holes in the trees as I pondered the larger existential questions about the nature of life. I began to intuit that there was something wrong with the statistic. Objective reality that I was being taught in school. The animals I observed had their own perspectives of the world and their realities, although it wasn't the world of human beings, of parking lots and malls. It was just as real to them. What then was really going on in this universe? Once I found an old tree with knots and dead limbs. There was a giant hole in its trunk, and I couldn't resist becoming another Jack into the beanstalk. Quietly taking my socks off and slipping them into my hands, I reached inside the hole to investigate. A great beating of flying feathers. Oh, as I reached inside the hole to investigate, as I withdrew my hand, a small screeching owl, with tufted ears, stared back at me. Here was another creature living in his own world, and yet a realm it somehow shared with me. I let this little fellow go, but I went home a slightly changed young boy. Not me. Robert, the writer of this Biocentrism book. My world and my home and neighborhood became but one part of a universe inhabited by consciousness. The same and yet seemingly different from mine. I was around 9, and the inexplicable and elusive quality of life truly gripped me. It reminds me of this video I just saw. There's this little girl, and she must have been like 2 years old, 2, 3 years old. She was so smart, so just an indigo child. And she was crying wickedly, so upset because they told her that her little baby brother was going to grow up. And she was like, well, no, he's so cute. No. She was so devastated that he would change, that he wouldn't be this adorable baby. Yeah, but she was even more devastated when she found out that she may not live to be, maybe she would die after 100. And she reminded me of me. I pray every night that I would live to be 100. I thought it meant every year of being 4 years old for 100 years. Yeah, then I was like, oh no, God, I don't want to be a raisin. With maybe a cane, can't walk, losing bits and pieces or something. Yeah, God does give you what you pray for. It's a matter of time. You will get it. It's just a matter of time. The power of belief is super strong. Yes, going back to consciousness. Yes, he was around 9. It had become increasingly clear that there was something fundamentally inexplicable about life, a force that I felt, though I didn't yet understand. It was on this day that I set out to trap a woodchuck. A woodchuck! It had its burrow next to Barbara's house. Her husband, Eugene, Mr. O'Donnell, was one of the last blacksmiths in New England, and as I arrived, I noticed that the chimney cap over his shop was rotating around and around, squeaking, rattling. Then the blacksmith suddenly emerged with his shotgun. Oh! Scarcely giving me a glance, and blew it off. The chimney cap's noise came to a sudden stop. Nope, I told myself I don't want to be caught by him. Guy sounds like the guy from Fox News. What the heck? Was he a bully for real? This is crazy. I mean, I know you're going to see this like days later, but yeah, I can't help my reaction. I mean, Won't want to encounter him on the playground. Gee. He should try eating vegetables. Maybe he would be a gentler sort. The hole of the woodchuck was not easy to reach. Ooh. Lying in such close proximity to Mr. O'Donnell's shop, I remembered that I could hear the bellows that fanned the coals of his forge. I crawled noiselessly through the long grass, occasionally stirring a grasshopper or a butterfly. I dug a hole under a clump of grass and set a new steel trap. Oh no! He's trying to trap the woodchuck. Oh no. Lastly, I took a stake and rock in hand, pounding it into the ground. This was my mistake. I was so engaged, I didn't notice anyone approaching. So I was thoroughly startled to hear, "What are you doing?" I looked up to see Mr. O'Donnell standing there, his eyes carefully inspecting the ground slowly and inquiringly until he spotted the trap. I said, nothing, trying to restrain myself from crying. "Give me that trap, child, and come with me." I was much too afraid to refuse compliance. I did as I was told and followed him into the shop. A strange new world crammed with all manner of tools and chimes of different shapes. Oh, the bedtime story's working. Starting the bellows, Mr. O'Donnell tossed the trap over the coals, and a tiny fire appeared underneath. Oh my goodness, getting hotter and hotter until, with a sudden puff, it burst into flames. "This thing can injure dogs." That's messages coming in. Very nice. During my show. Yeah, so it looks like he burnt the thing. Yes, this thing can injure dogs and even children. He burnt it. When the trap was red hot, he took it from the forge and pounded it into a little square with his hammer. For some little time, he had said nothing while the metal cooled. I meanwhile was thoroughly engaged in looking around and eyeing all the metal figurines, chimes, weather vanes proudly displayed on the shelf. There was a Roman warrior. I'll tell you what, I'll give you 50 cents for every dragonfly you catch. There's sketches of a dragonfly. I said that would be fun, and when I parted, I was so excited I forgot about the woodchuck and the trap. The next day, freshly wakened, I set off to the fields with a marmalade jar and a butterfly net. The air was alive with insects, and flowers with bees and butterflies, but I hadn't seen any dragonflies. As I floated through the last of the meadows, the long and fuzzy spikes of a cattail attracted my attention. A huge dragonfly was humming round and round, and when at last I caught it, I hopped, skipped, and jumped all the way back to Mr. O'Donnell's shop, a place so recently transformed from its recent existence as a haunted structure of terror and mystery, making a magnifying glass. Mr. O'Donnell held the jar up to the light, made a careful study of the dragonfly. He fished out a number of rods and bars that lined up the wall. Next, with a little pounding, he wrought a splendorous figurine that was the perfect physical image of the insect. Though he was working in metal, it had about it a beauty as airy and insubstantial as the delicate creature. But he did not capture all of it. What I wanted to know, even then, was how it felt to be that dragonfly and be perceived by the world. As long as I live, I will never forget that day, and though Mr. O'Donnell's now gone, there still remains in his shop that little iron dragonfly, now covered with dust, to remind me that there is something more elusive to life than the succession of shapes and forms that we see frozen into matter. And now we have chapter 5. It is tomorrow. Good night. Pleasant dreams.